of RF. So they had superior AVC in that they usually had a delayed AVC to make sure that the gain would ride along with the lack or too much signal, so it's to come out even in the speaker. And the next, the two differences primarily between a car radio and a house radio would be the antenna circuit and the power supply. The antenna circuit's very important because you're trying to get the RF out of the air into your radio out of a pole that's this length, or this is 3 sections, so you pull it out like that. And that has to be, the radio has to be sensitive enough to give a good, reasonable, constant output. So the antenna circuit has got a loading coil connected with it to sort of fool the circuitry to think it's looking at a longer wire than it really is. And tuning of that circuit is paramount. Once you service the set, the last thing you do when it's in the car is turn the antenna trimmer for maximum output. You have to rock it back and forth. Pick a weak station, usually at the high end of the band, although some Delcos advise using around 600 kc, but I always did everything in high end. And that is a very sensitive adjustment. It makes all the difference, especially when the customer comes back and says, "Hey, my radio don't work as good as when you started." So I forgot to turn the trimmer. The trimmer is located in the older set, is in the set itself. In this case, you have to remove the lid and turn the antenna trimmer right here. The later sets had it on the side of the set, like this Motorola here. Here's the trimmer. A lot of sets have it under the tuning knob, and you have to pull that off and turn it. Okay, the power supply. Tubes require a couple hundred volts, 250 to operate properly. And that's generated by the vibrator circuit. The vibrator is just, I'd say, a tuned reed that's flopping back and forth, making and breaking contacts in there, so chopping up to 6 volts to into the transformer. So at the output, you're getting about 200, 250 volts, so-called AC, the frequency of the reed, which modern vibrators are all 115 cycles. And that is rectified by the rectifier tube. The older sets like this would have an 84, I believe. However, this set is sort of unique in that it has a synchronous vibrator. Synchronous vibrator, which I have one here, has an extra set of contacts. So it is rectifying the output of the transformer into DC that can be filtered through the regular filter circuit of condensers and a choke. However, most radios did not use a synchronous rectifier. They're more expensive to make. Now this set is a pretty old set. It's a Wells Gardner. Never seen one before. About in 1933. And this is one of the first under-dash radios. Has different slot variations here to mount under the dash of your car. It has a synchronous vibrator and cautions you with a label here to make sure it's plugged in the right direction, depending on whether you have a positive or negative ground from your battery in the car. Most cars were positive ground in the 30s. Now, if you get it reversed, you're going to be reversing the polarity to the filter caps and so forth in the entire radio, and it doesn't work too well. Usually it would blow a fuse also. Okay, and I've got two examples of an underdash radio. This would be one of the first. One of the latest is the Motorola on the right. That's about 1952 or 3. And I'll have that for a demo here later. Let's see, what else can I tell you? I guess I'm open for questions. Ryan?
So, you said that one radio, you had to adjust the antenna trimmer inside the radio? So how would you adjust it once it was back in the car if it was inside the radio?
The box is mounted hopefully in such a manner that you can remove the cover.
Wow. Hopefully.
So it wasn't a Packard?
No. It even has wing nuts here.
So have you ever done that?
Well, sure, you had to do it if you wanted.
I mean, you personally, have you done that? You had to reach up inside there and turn the knob inside the radio?
Yeah, turn the trimmer, you bet.
Wow.
Another bad one would be a 46, no wait a minute, 1940 through 48 Buick. The trimmer is way up high, right behind the cowl vent. And the screwdriver had to be a certain length because it was too long, it would run into things. You had to go at right angles right into the back of the set to turn that trimmer. Oh yes, and also the hole for the trimmer is got a little snap plug that you have to remove first and put the snap plug back. But most techs, of course, threw it away. But I always put it back. What else can we say?
Question? Lots of questions. Question, Rudy? What about the 0Z4? How many sets used that?
Oh, the famous OZ4. We used to sell a lot of them, bought them by the case. I think we charged $2 for replacement. Anyway, the OZ4 is a gas rectifier. It's a cheap way to get some DC out of an AC system. In other words, it's a dual diode gas rectifier. And it didn't last too long because it had to run, 80 mils or so through it, maybe up to 100. It didn't like that too well. General Motors used them almost exclusively. So we sold a lot of OZ4s to people. And that's the first thing that failed on a car in the 50s. But most of it was GM cars. Ford, for instance, and others used a genuine filament rectifier like a 6X5. And they lasted as long as the other tubes. George?
Wasn't the reason for the OZ4 was that it cut down on the amount of drain on the battery because it didn't have any filament?
I was going to mention that. You're right. Yeah, you saved 300 mils filament current. And as another consideration, early cars did not have a very efficient generating system as we know today with alternators. So anything they could save on current draw was a plus.
My father wanted us to save on current draw by not letting us kids play with the radio.
Exactly.
What kind of amperage did those things draw? Like a 48
This set here, for instance, this Zenith, that sucker takes about 8 amps almost.
Oh my God.
Because
Well, Daddy was right.
you've got 1, 2, 3, 4. You've got 6 tubes, each drawing filament 300 mils. And You got a field coil that takes 2 to 3 amps. And it does have a 20 amp fuse in it. Well, altogether, it's probably drawing 8 amps at least.
That's 50 watts.
Is that 6 volts?
Yeah.
12 volts?
This is, no 12 volts. They didn't come in until 1955. Yeah, everything's 6 volt. Like,
Rudy, you've done a lot of car radio repair over the years. I know you were active commercially for probably 10 or 12 years, and you've done a lot of radios after that. What would you say is absolutely the worst one you've ever had to work on?
we've talked about this before.
Any of them.
Well,
Blow plug.
okay, 39 or 40 Fords.
Why?
39 was sort of a barricade. You had a big box. They finally got the loudspeaker in the dash. There's a grill there. It had cables, a cable going from the tuning head, plus a big cable with a Jones type plug on the end of it that plugged into the set. And that carried volume control, tone, push. It had a push button right in the center to change stations. 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, then back to dial 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so forth. But the 40 would be my worst in that it was all in one box. That was a plus. But if you had any dial troubles at all, that is with the dial cord or one of the tuning slugs for one of the 5 stations doesn't work, you got to remove the top of the head assembly, the piece of metal that covers the whole thing. And as soon as you did that, all the coil support and the tuning condenser support and all that just dropped down in the glob. And so you have to have this thing on its back usually, and maybe have a rag or 2 around so things wouldn't run into each other while you're working on it.
It had a pair of thumb wheels vertically mounted on the.
Yes, it did.
Every
Yeah.
time you take that front off, because there's always something behind there that has to be replaced. I've
Exactly.
always had a hard time getting the 2 thumb wheels, and then they had some ID tabs, or it was like the 2 wheels, a smaller one, and it had a gear that ran on the inside of a backwards gear on the thumb wheel.
Yes,
And those
yes,
things-
it was, the thumb wheel, the plastic type thumb wheel, was geared to, on the left side would be the volume control switch. Okay, on the right side, it was, Zenith, for instance, went through a vernier operation using a dial cord. And if you lost a dial cord or something, you were in trouble. Now later on, the stuff I worked on in the last few years, for instance, not only do you have the original type problems, but the plastic is now starting to shrink and change. Oh yes, they make a replacement knob and all that. Trouble is they don't fit exactly. You may have to do a little shaving and filing. It's a mess.
Hey, Rudy,
Yeah.
were most of the early 30s cars positive ground?
Yes.
And then when did they go to the negative?
There's an old saying a friend of mine liked to quote, and I've never forgot it. Positive ground the world around, except for General Motors. And that's basically true. If you go back into the teens and right up through the 12-volt systems in '55, most cars were positive ground. General Motors stuff is usually negative ground.
Well, what happens to the car radio if they change the car system to a negative ground from a positive?
If you have a synchronous vibrator, that's when you're in trouble because you change the polarity on the rectified output of the vibrator system. But if you're using a tube rectifier, no problem at all. Sid?
Two questions. Were majority of those radios full wave or half wave? And then what kind of filter caps do you normally see in those radios?
All the rectification was full wave. The only set I ever worked on, it was single contact, was a 1929 or 30 Cadillac, where the power supply was mounted on the engine side of the firewall in a big box. The RF section and audio was on the inside of the car. Well, the vibrator only had one set of contacts instead of two, so the reed only would actuate the contacts in one direction. There's nothing the other. Well, what are you going to do? That thing didn't hardly play. I don't think I could get 90 or 100 volts out of it. So what I had done was make a voltage doubler circuit using a couple of caps. I think you folks know how to do that. And got the voltage up to a couple hundred volts that way, and it worked fine.
And the filter caps? Can you give
Filter caps, the standard cap to start with was 8 mics, because in the early 30s, 8 mics at 300 volts, say, was a pretty big object, you know. And the later sets like this Motorola here, you could have any cap. The smallest I remember would be 10 mics, but they usually run 20.
Wasn't there another set of caps? I remember you telling me about those. They were the hash filters that ran against the contacts to clean up all that noise on them. You called them hash filters.
Those are typically coils.
Were they? Well, I thought they were caps. Because remember we were talking about those little portable radios that had the vibrators in them, and you said that there were hash filters in there that you had to replace usually.
Were they in the vibrator?
You sure it wasn't the buffer I was talking about?
Could be.
Yeah, the buffer. Important condenser. That's the second thing that would go bad on sets of the 40s and 50s. The buffer is, in a way, a suppressor condenser connected parallel the output of the power transformer, because you're not getting a nice sinusoidal wave out of this thing. You're getting things with spikes in it, and which reflect back into the primary circuit, which causes the points of the vibrator to burn prematurely because they're sparking. Well, the buffer condenser will subdue that to practically nothing, so you don't have that problem. So we replaced a lot of 006s and 008s, along with the OZ4. Pretty good business. You had to open up the set, take it all apart, then explain to the customer why this happened, what caused it. Well, they were paper caps that dipped in beeswax
They took a beating.
at that time. Well, yes, then the good Black Beauty come along, and they were fine, brand new. Today they're a collector's item, and they all turn into resistors besides being a cap. But some people buy them. I don't know why.
Hey, if I remember right, and I can be wrong at my tender age, weren't some of the buffers on the primary across the vibrators contacts?
Yes, in a way, but they were really hash suppressors.
Well,
Yeah,
you did the same thing.
but it didn't affect the point operation much.
Oh, it didn't.
Did not. That is for wear and tear. It's the secondary the circuit that was really important to suppress that.
That was important, period.
And to some extent, that's a resonant circuit, because you'll see some Philcos have a 002 at 1600 volts on the secondary, and others are 006, 008, some are 01s. Buick, for instance, used .015, two of them, and each one paralleled from center tap to the outer end of the high voltage winding. Why they did it, I don't know, because I just take and put in a 007 or 8 and parallel the entire winding. I don't know why they went to ground,
Maybe
except
they just had a
for
good deal on
maybe
those.
some hash suppression.
How about less voltage on the capacitor?
How about what?
Less voltage on each individual capacitor. They didn't have to have as high a voltage capacitor.
Well, they did use high voltage capacitors though. They weren't just a standard
Their
cap.
voltage would be cut in half if it went to the center.
That's true. Okay, let's see what else. Oh yes, back up a bit. Early car radios did not have full antennas. They didn't think of it at that time. So they had an under running board antenna system, 2 rods suspended and insulated by whatever. This is a modern concept. This is not an original. But anyway, this is usually under the running board on the driver's side, and as you can see, that's a pretty low impedance affair with a lot of capacity to the running board, which was pretty well taken out by the correct antenna circuit. Now, some of the early radios also had a switch on them to go from running board antenna to a pole antenna, because you got an impedance difference there quite a bit. They also had a thing called a local distance switch on some early car radios. Well, what that did was cut the gain down to the RF and first mixer a little bit, because we had street cars in those days, and probably never driven over a streetcar track with a running board antenna trying to listen to the stations, because you're going to hear all the clicks and pops of the circuitry of the streetcar system. So if you cut the sensitivity down, you'll subdue it. You don't stop it. But that's what it was. All it did is just cut the gain down on the front end of the receiver.
So Rudy, what year did pole antenna come in?
Pole antennas started, I have to judge, I'd say 34, 36. Ford, for instance, in Chrysler products, would use the chicken wire netting above the headliner to support the top material. We didn't have full steel bodies at that time, and so you had a cloth top. So they figured out, well, heck, we got a piece of wire up there, it's a good antenna, insulated from the body, and they used that. In fact, Ford had a piece of antenna lead with a connector on the end, come down the driver's side of the windshield, and the set had a connector that would connect up to it. I'm trying to see it. Yeah, here it is. A thing like that, that would go onto the connector. It was already in the car, that came with the car. And I haven't talked about noise suppression from the car. Car radio idea, of course, started in the late 20s. There was no power supplies at that time, so we used B batteries. Well, the filament, of course, comes from the 6-volt system of the car. That's no problem. How do you get high voltage? Well, you bought B batteries. They were not cheap in the 20s. So he not only didn't use the radio much, but you couldn't hear the radio with the engine running because of the ignition noise. So he had to suppress that. Well, that was done to some extent by putting a noise suppressor, which is nothing more than about a 20K resistor, in the distributor caps on the wire coming from the coil. That helped out. Well, the pole antenna made a better shielding of idea than using that wire up above that got all the noise from the car. So with this thing, either this one resistor in the center of the distributor, or one of these on each spark plug. So you got a Ford V8 where you had to have 8 of these. It did suppress the noise. It also weakened the spark, which wasn't too good for older cars if the plugs weren't in first class condition.
You clean your plugs more often.
Anything else?
Rudy, when did they start putting radios into cars? And I assume it was the expensive cars first? And can you elaborate on that?
I wonder about that myself. I have read it and I forgot what was said, but basically, I'd say 1932 would be one of the first where you could order a radio with the car. In this case, it'd be a 1932 Ford, for instance. The control head was mounted on the steering post.
Yep.
And it had a cable and 2 cables going from it to the back of the car. The radio, a Grizzly Bruno, as I recall, was a box about a foot square. There was 2 of them. You had to cut a hole in the flooring of the car under the rear seat cushion. And that's where the cables ended up to operate the thing. One box was the power supply. That was sort of before good vibrator, so they used a Jenny motor generator set,
Oh my God.
6 volt to about 250 volts. So it's screaming away there, making DC for you. And the other side is the RF section. Good.
So Rudy, I think I put together an auto history for about 5 or 6 different clubs, and in the Ford one that I did, I think 34, 35, and possibly 36, it was a dealer accessory, and as you described, they actually installed it at the dealership. I'm thinking it was around 36, 37 that they started offering it out of the factory with a radio already in it. Does that sound right?
You can back up a bit. Actually, 33 and 4 would be the first factory installed radio, and it was in the glove box. You took out the glove box and put the entire radio unit. It looked somewhat like this on the right side of the car. The dial was quite attractive. It looks exactly like the speedometer, for instance. And it worked fairly well. So that would be Ford, which I'm most familiar with. 33 and 4. 34 also was the first time that Ford used a complete radio box with everything in it except the control head. You took out the ashtray in the center of the dashboard, and that's where you installed the control head that matched the color of the dash and so forth. And with the 2 cables, it controlled the set. So that's 33 and 4. 35 used the same set but a different head. The 35, 36 ashtray is round, and the control head went with that. So you could actually start ordering a new radio with your car if you had the money. We're talking about, what, $85 to $100 just for the radio in those days,
Oh, yeah.
which is a pretty good sum compared to what the car cost. Let's see, 35, 6, 7, 8. The first in-dash loudspeaker would be 38, I think. 38 and 9. But the radio itself was still separate, run with cables.
I just finished a 36 open about a week ago, and that had a really cool grill with a piece of grill cloth in it with the script Ford in it. That wasn't in the dash, it was just in the box.
Yes, that concept started in
Side
30,
for overhead speaker.
34. And there was sort of a mishmash of cabinetry used starting in 35 to 36, depending on, I guess, what was available. The latest sets for 36 Ford, for instance, was a pretty nice rounded cabinet. For open cars, they had a speaker pod that mounted right onto the set itself. However, for closed cars, you had an opening above the windshield up there for a 5-inch speaker.
A great big plug in the side.
Yes, plug in the side, and that was a dynamic speaker also. It was not magnetic speaker, not cobalt speakers.
Rudy, it used to be in the 50s and 60s at least, you could hear a Ford go down the street because of the ignition system with an amateur radio receiver. What was the inherent problem that they could only resolve that with resistor type spark plugs? What was the design flaw, do you know?
I would say the main design flaw was with Ford, with the ignition coil that's in a plastic pod. The coil itself was immersed in tar in this plastic thing. So that thing could emit any noise it wanted to, whereas a standard ignition coil in most cars was in a metal can. And it's grounded, of course, when it's mounted to the firewall or whatever. I think that's what it was. And it wasn't until 1949 that Ford actually used the standard ignition coils we know in a metal configuration. Anybody else? Well, I think I've covered the important things.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, I have a little demo on vibrators here after the meeting.
That's fine.
I'll show you how I fix about 80% of vibrators that don't work.
All right. Great. This one right here is an echo phone. And it's mentioned in the article in the box that holds a battery. When I first saw this, I thought somebody made the box. It looked a little amateurish to me. Turns out not to be. I've seen others, and this is the way they made them. And the guts of this radio, wow, is identical to the guts of this radio, which was made for the Adler Royale Typewriter Company. And it will slide in this same box. So, made in California, and two entrepreneur type of hams started it, and they turned it into a millions of dollar business within 3 years. So it was a growth situation. So the other one here is a 1925 Hallock made in Portland. And nice little article on Hallock. It is TRF. This one, all three of these work and work very well. I didn't want to take up time with the power supply and the speaker today. But you ought to look at this because we should cherish the ones that are made around us here, like in Portland and Cornelius, and with a long radio. But were quite a few. Norco was made here in Portland. My Norco hasn't gotten back from the Pitt mansion yet, so that'll happen on Monday, or I would have probably brought the Norco as well. But that's what it is. Take a look at it.